Welcome to E Squared Emporium for all things AP Psychology. Today we are talking about Social Psychology Part 1. So what is attribution? Attribution, Fritz Heider, 1958, first came up with this term, and he says this is how we explain the causes of behavior, both our own behavior and the behavior of others. So we explain someone else's behavior by crediting either the situation, which would be the environment or the external causes, or the person's disposition, which is their personality. It's the internal. So looking at just the dispositional attribution. So disposition means personality. So it's internal, it's personality, it's dispositional. So this is where we explain an outcome by looking within an individual. So we say their success or their failure is due to the person's lack of effort. So we're going to attribute their behavior, their thoughts, their beliefs to personality traits and characteristics, such as I performed well on the test because I studied hard for the exam. I am a responsible person. Or we look at somebody else and we go, that person is so lazy. See, we're looking at a personality or a disposition. The other opposite side of this is a situational attribution. And this is where we look at an external cause, an environmental cause. We might say it's fate. We might say it's good luck or bad luck. We might say it's chance. So we explain the outcome or the behavior by looking outside the individual. We look at the situation. We look at the environment. And then we attribute behavior, thoughts, and beliefs to things that might be outside of that person's control, such as I couldn't get my homework done last night because I had to help my family, or I didn't do well in the test because the teacher didn't tell us what to study, or it was the referee's fault. So attribution bias. We tend to attribute the cause of someone's behavior to their personality. Typically, it's inaccurate. We underestimate the fact that they have situational factors. They live in an environment. Things happen to them. They have a bad day. But when it comes to us, boy, we want people to know that it's the environment, right? I'm not really lazy. It's because of this and this and this. I'm not usually a person who's late. It's because of this and this and this, and traffic was bad. So how we judge others is that it must be their personality. Anna is unreliable. She can't even get to the meeting on time. Ben is incompetent. He doesn't finish his projects on time. We cause the fundamental attribution error. This is what we tend to do. It is when we overestimate the other person's personality or disposition, and we underestimate that they have been influenced by a situation or by an environment. You know, they got up late, their alarm didn't go off, they got stuck in bad traffic, their coffee spilled. We don't really give them the benefit of the doubt. This is more likely to happen if we don't know that person really well. Like for our best friend, we don't make this error as much, but for a stranger or someone we kind of know a little bit, we definitely make this error. Now, this occurs in almost all cultures that we've studied so far, but it seems to be strongest in individualist Western cultures like the USA, Canada, Europe. In Asian cultures, people tend to still be more sensitive to the power of the situation. They assume that you're responsible. They assume that you're a good person, and it must be the situation that created that. So here's an example from your book. The person in front of you is swerving their car all over the road, and a situational attribution, maybe that driver is ill, maybe the driver is sick. A dispositional attribution, oh, what a crazy driver, what a jerk, must be texting. So if you give them the situational attribution, you might call 911 to make sure that they're okay. You might slow down. You might have a very tolerant reaction. You might slow your own speed and go carefully around them. But if you think that they're just a crazy driver or a bad driver, well, you're going to speed up or race them or give them a dirty look or, you're cursing under your breath about it. So again, we overestimate the personality or the disposition, and we underestimate the situation on that behavior. So self-serving bias, actor-observer bias. We take credit for success, even if it's not earned, and we blame failures on external forces. So we do the opposite, though, when we evaluate others, right? I was unprepared for the exam because I had a family emergency last night, but Sally was unprepared because she's just not that good at math, right? People might say, my company is going to make it because I'm really good at business. But these other companies, yeah, they're not going to make it. So this is where the actor, meaning us, it is our point of view. And our point of view is that we're doing fine, it's everybody else. Self-serving bias is very similar to actor-observer bias. So actor-observer bias is we're the actor, it's our point of view. Self-serving bias, again, is the bias that's self-serving towards us. So it's the tendency to assign credit for success but blame failures on external forces. We blame everything else and everyone else, but we don't blame ourselves. We take credit for success, and the failures are because of someone else or an external situation beyond our control. So our successes are because of our incredibly stable personality traits. And our failures are because of the teacher, because of the group I was assigned, because of the environment of the situation. So we might say, I won the game today because I'm a great athlete. But yesterday I lost the game because that referee made some bad calls. Or I passed the math class because I'm smart. Or I got lost driving home because of that construction zone. See, it's always, the bias is always to serve us. So moving on to our styles of whether or not we are an optimist or a pessimist. How do we explain behaviors that happen to us? Do we make sense of events, good and bad events, based on an optimist where the glass is half full or the pessimist where the glass is half empty? And this one is funny because the realist knows the juice has gone bad anyway. So this can impact your health, your happiness, your level of stress, your level of productivity. It can lead to depression. It can have all kinds of impacts on us. So optimism, people explain good events as personal, permanent, and pervasive. What does that mean? It means that the bad events are just temporary. We're just going through a bad spell. It's just temporary and then it'll go away, and we be specific and it's external. So setbacks are just temporary and they're completely solvable, and it's just an opportunity to learn and grow. Pessimism is a worldview where the situation is permanent and you are stuck. I will always be living in my parents' basement, right? I like to use Tigger and Eeyore to describe these two. People tend to blame themselves for bad events and unreasonably assume that it's their fault or punishment, or just think it's always going to happen to them. It's always going to be this way. So they may attribute their actions to external forces, right? I just don't have any good luck. So it can be maladaptive, which means not good adaptive, and unhealthy. Like, I had no choice but to get violent. I had to, right? I'm never good at tests. So it kind of becomes learned helplessness, and it can be a form of depression. On a similar route is the locus of control. Julian Rotter came up with this in 1954. So we either have an internal or an external locus of control. So it's our belief about how much we can control our actions and how much we can control the events in our life. So it's the degree to which you believe that you can control things. Like, I can control the consequences of my behavior, or the consequences of my behavior are out of my control and I can't do anything about them. So if you don't have any control, you're kind of a victim to what's going to happen in your life, and you give away all of your power. So the word locus is a place or location. So this is the place where our control comes from. So we either believe that the control comes internally, or we believe the control is out there, everybody else. So an internal locus of control. We believe events in our life are the result of our own actions. We can attribute outcomes to our own control. We believe that hard work will lead to obtaining positive outcomes. Now, it depends on us as to whether or not we have control, right? I will do well on the test if I study. I will not do well on the test if I don't study. And so it's this growth mindset. It's this belief that I can handle this and it's up to me. So it is the opposite of a victim mindset. It's a very empowered mindset. The external locus of control is the victim mindset. So people believe they can't control their environment, it controls them. And when you're a teenager, there's a lot of your environment that is being controlled by others. So that is kind of true. But once you get to be 18, maybe we can shift into more of an internal locus of control. So your present circumstances, you may say, well, you know, my influence, my decisions, my control, it's all out of my decisions. It's out of my hands. So as adults, we put the blame on others. It's fate, it's bad luck, it's my history in the past, it's the people I dated, it's my divorce, it's my job, it's my boss. We might even go to conspiracy theories. It's the government, it's the deep state, it's the evil corporations, right? You become a victim and you can't change your situation and you have no control over your life or your fate. This again leads to learned helplessness, and it is the more stressful of the two, and it leads to clinical depression. So, where it might happen in our teen life is we might praise or blame an external factor, right? It's the coach's fault. It's the referee's fault. It's my teacher's fault. That exam wasn't fair. We don't ever say, well, I could have studied more, or I missed class that day, or, I wasn't really paying attention. We blame others. Person perception is really like schemas. We talked about schemas. It's the mental representations that influence how we perceive others, how people form impressions about other people. And we make these social cues, we make these quick judgments about relationships and context and characteristics pretty much immediately when we meet somebody. So we look at social roles, social norms. We use our schemas about how is this person behaving in this social situation? How are they dressed? What's their physical appearance? What's their verbal and nonverbal communication? What's their face saying? What's their body language saying? For example, how do you determine if someone is trustworthy? We have to use all of this for person perception. So, some examples. We may pay more attention to someone who seems to be consistent with what our idea of that situation is. So, how should a person behave in a public setting? How should they dress? We will listen more intently to a presentation given by a person if they're professionally dressed and they seem to know their topic. They're an expert on their topic. But we're going to pay less attention to this other person here who's dressed non-professionally and may not be knowledgeable about their specific topic. So think of your social media influencers and bloggers, right? Do they come across as knowledgeable? Do they come across as knowing what they're talking about? If they're giving a makeup tip and you really don't think their makeup looks very good, that's going to definitely impact their person perception. So why do we do this? Well, this is a top-down processing technique, and it helps us to quickly respond to everyone that we encounter and everything that we encounter, but it can lead to errors in judgment. We tend to judge others too quickly, and it's really hard to change our minds once we've done that. It can lead to narrow-mindedness and eventually prejudice, stereotyping, discrimination. For example, people might assume that someone with disabilities is not also intellectually gifted, but we know from Stephen Hawking that that's not true, that you could be in a wheelchair and have a genius IQ. So the mere exposure effect, this deals with familiarity. How familiar are we with seeing your image or your face? We feel like we know celebrities. They don't know who we are, but we see their image all the time. So, you feel like you know Taylor Swift, but she doesn't know who you are. And proximity is a part of this too, to being really close. So your neighbor, kids you sit with in class, people you're going to be in a college dorm with. We are drawn to individuals with whom we have lots of frequent interactions. So we're likely to marry them. They're likely to be our best friends. That's why most relationships start in the office. People develop a preference for things merely because they are familiar with them. I know you, I'm comfortable with you, I see you all the time. So in real life, this is how advertising works. This is how marketing works. Think about all your favorite brands. Why do you like them? How do you feel when you see their logos? Do they make you feel a certain way? Do you feel rich or proud or sporty or, accomplished when you have this particular logo? And that's not by accident. It's very carefully marketed that way, like the Nike swoosh on a shirt or an ad or shoes. You have a ping of familiarity. You know exactly what that is, what that means, the brand, you remember an ad. So it's like running into an old friend in a crowd, someone you haven't seen in a while. You're naturally drawn to them because you know them. You're like, hey, I know you. How are you doing? So Nike is everywhere and it attaches itself to positive moments in the ads. It's the winning of the game, it's the accomplishment. So there's epic sport victories and, style icons rocking their gear. So brands are all playing this gentle game of tug of war for your affection and for you to buy them. And with every exposure, they're pulling you closer and closer. And with every dollar that we spend, we're using the mere exposure effect. So we talked about this story of the woman who is in love with somebody who moves away and they're in a long distance relationship, but they write letters back and forth like pen pals, only it's the mailman who delivers that mail every day to her that she eventually marries. So it's the mailman who delivers those long distance love letters. So the mere exposure effect of seeing the mailman every day. And during elections, it's the candidate with the most media exposure that wins. Even negative media exposure, they have name recognition. So, a self fulfilling prophecy, Robert Merton in 1948 said our expectations cause us to unconsciously act in a manner that will bring about the very behaviors that confirm our expectations. So, it is kind of like confirmation bias, right? We only see the things that confirm our beliefs. So, a belief or an expectation that helps to make itself come true. These are preconceived expectations of others or of ourselves, and then we bring the behavior around to actually happen. We live up to the expectation, good or bad. If you think that you are going to really love your Spanish class, then you work really hard, you get really good grades, you prove to yourself that you're really good at Spanish class. If you think that you're not very good at math class, then you won't study that much for the test, you stop paying attention in class, maybe you miss a couple classes, and you then take a C or lower on a test and you prove that you were right all along. See, I knew it all along. So again, it's a belief or expectation that helps to make itself come true. It is a preconceived expectation and of others and of ourselves. And then we bring about the very thing that we said. So here was a study in self-fulfilling prophecy. Dr. Rosenthal got together with Lenore Jacobson. She was the principal in 1968 of a school, and they wanted to do something called teacher expectations, also known as the Pygmalion effect from the myth of Pygmalia. So they gave IQ tests to children, and then they came up with a fake list with fake results. And they gave the fake results to the teachers. Look at these students who are starred. We put a star by their names because they are potential bloomers. These kids are exceptional. And it was just random and completely fake. None of that was based on IQ scores. But their expectations actually became the reality. Those test scores of those children that were labeled as potential bloomers, they rose by 20%. Just because the teachers took that information and probably gave them a little bit more time, probably spent a little bit more attention there, maybe even made harder questions for those students. They had higher expectations for those students. So our expectations shape reality. High expectations. Students who were expected to do well did very well. The greater the expectation that was placed upon them, the better they performed. And that is true for people that work for us, employees, for our pets and animals, for children, for students. The higher our expectations for them, the more they will step up to those expectations. And the opposite is also true. The lower your expectations are for a group of students or employees or animals or people, they will definitely fulfill that as well. So if we lower our expectations, we have lower scores. So, what happens when we label people as troublemakers or criminal or disruptive? Do they start to fulfill that self fulfilling prophecy? Do they make that actually happen because they believe it to be true? And we see that college completion rates actually rise with teacher expectations. So you can see when the teacher believes in advanced degrees, when the teacher believes that you can get a 4-year college degree or a master's degree, then we see that the students actually match those higher expectations. So, social comparison is a theory that explains how individuals evaluate their opinions and abilities by comparing themselves to others. And boy, do we do this on social media. We are all social comparing. So, comparing yourself to others is a form of measurement and self assessment. We start doing it, as we know Eric Erickson said, we start doing it with inferiority. So, we identify where we stand in according to our own set of standards. And this helps to reduce uncertainty and helps to define who we are, defines ourselves, right? So, upward social comparison, when you compare yourself to someone in a perceived higher position, higher in status, higher in wealth, higher in education, ability, relationships, it could motivate you. Like my best friend got an A on the test. I'm going to study harder because I want to get an A too. But it can also fuel jealousy and FOMO, right? The fear of missing out, especially on social media, right? My brother got to go on an amazing vacation. I don't get to go on that. Look, my best friend got a new car and I want one. Looking at people on social media, they have photoshopped their image, they've used filters. Everybody looks rich and happy and successful and perfect, and like they have somehow 25 hours a day to get everything done. Downward social comparison, that one makes us feel better when you compare yourself to someone in a lower position. So, one of the examples that they give in the 12-step programs is if you're an alcoholic and you hang out with people who are heroin addicts, you feel much better about your drinking problem. But just for everyday people, you can realize how fortunate you are when you look at other people. Like, wow, I'm so much better off than that. Or, boy, she really needs to get her act together. Or what we say in the South, bless your heart, right? It can lead to judgment. It can lead to viewing people as lower status, people facing challenges, people who are going through unemployment or poverty or trying to get back up on their feet. It can lead us to be a little bit judgy, but it does help our self esteem that we feel a little bit better than they are. At least our grades aren't like so and so's. And we have relative deprivation when we compare ourselves to others. When we compare to what others have in terms of house or vacation or money or cell phones or cars. They noticed this first during World War II, where some soldiers felt like they weren't getting enough food. Some supplies got to the front line and got to certain people and not to other people. Certain soldiers felt deprived. So they had relative deprivation. Your canned tin of meat looks better than my canned tin of meat, or you got more crackers than I got. We may feel deprived comparing ourselves to the wealthy people on TV. You watch TV shows and everyone seems glamorous and everyone seems like a millionaire and no one ever seems to need to go to work. Maybe your friend shows up on Monday with a brand new car and you don't have a car, or you have an old hoopty that's kind of falling apart, and this now is something that you want. So the halo effect, also called positivity bias, is the tendency to favor one student or one person more than another. We might say teacher's pet. And there's also the reverse halo effect. That one kid that's always getting in trouble. So, positivity bias, sometimes called the cheerleader effect. So, we favor one person. It could be at a job, it could be at school, it could be in Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts, it could be in coaching on a team. So, we tend to assume that people who are attractive are intelligent, kind, honest, good at sports. We also assume that just because something says it's organic means it's healthy. But, organic cookies are not necessarily healthy. We might assume that just because somebody went to a prestigious university, oh, you went to Yale, you went to Harvard, that means that they're more skilled, and they might be, but they also might not be. So some real world examples are how teachers treat students, and I'll bet you can think back to some student in one class that had a halo effect. They could do no wrong, they got extra tutoring, they got extra help, they got extra credit. And I'm sure you can think of someone who had the reverse halo effect, who, every time they raised their hand, the teacher would be like, "What do you want?" So we see this with how supervisors evaluate their employees, How do people tip food servers, right? We see that really attractive food servers who are bubbly and encouraging, that they get the halo effect and they get a higher tip. So the last concept is cognitive dissonance theory. So what is dissonance? Dissonance is tension. It's tension as the result from holding conflicting beliefs, attitudes, opinions, or values. It's an uncomfortable psychological state of holding this tension over an internal conflict. Basically, it means our actions are not matching our thoughts. So we have this inner drive to hold our attitude and beliefs in harmony. And Leon Festinger researched this in the 1950s. We really want to avoid that tension, that dissonance, that disharmony. It's not comfortable at all. So it occurs when a person holds conflicting beliefs and our actions don't align with our values. So we act in a way that's not keeping with our attitudes. We will eventually change our attitudes to match our actions. If we are not willing to change our actions, then we have to change our attitudes to match them because we can't hold that dissonance for very long. So here's an example. Um, you might say recycling is good for the environment, and then you set up a recycling bin at home and you recycle. That is being in alignment. But you're in dissonance if you say recycling is good for the environment and you learn about it at school, but then you never recycle your plastic bottles. You just throw them right in the trash and you don't do anything about it. So now you're in dissonance because you know better and you know better and you should do better and your actions don't match your words. You are not walking your talk, right? Another example, JJ is politically very liberal in his beliefs, but his girlfriend has joined the Young Republicans Club and she's now an officer of the club. And he wants to spend more time with her. So he joins the Young Republicans. And he now has to figure out his attitude and his behavior are inconsistent. So he changes his attitude because he wants to stay with his girlfriend. So he says, well, the conservatives have a point. I think I'm going to keep coming back and listening. Another example, there's a student named Alex who values his academic success, and he knows he's spending too much time on social media and he knows it's interfering with his studying. Yet he's scrolling through TikTok for hours, even in the classroom, even during study hall, instead of actually getting the studying done. So his values of academic success are not matching his actions, and he's going to experience tension or dissonance, and he's going to have to change his actions or change his attitude. One really common example is smokers. Smokers know that it's not good for their health. They know it's unhealthy. They've been told by a doctor, they've been told by people, they see it on TV. So you might, say things like, well, I don't really smoke all that much, or maybe I'll switch to vaping. Or, well, we all die of something. Or, I don't actually know anybody who's actually had lung cancer and nobody in my family's ever had it. So, three ways that they might get around that. They might stop reading anything about the bad side effects of smoking. They might avoid any people who are going to criticize their smoking. They're going to only seek information that supports that smoking is relaxing to your health. And they might reassure themselves that, what, I'm fine. I'm not a professional athlete, so I can smoke a little. I'm cutting down to one or two a day. Part of this is we get selective exposure, which again is part of that confirmation bias, right? We minimize the dissonance by only reading selective information. We only expose ourselves to information that supports the choices we have made. If you know that you want to be a vegetarian, then you are going to only read books about being a vegetarian and how that is the very best choice, and you're going to avoid anything that might talk about animal products. So one study they did with this, nearly all college students agreed that cheating was morally wrong. They were told to stop their test at the bell, and the teacher left the room and they were being observed. 71% of those students cheated. They continued to work after the bell rang, even though they just said they know cheating is morally wrong. So they put a mirror in front of the class and they noticed this time only 7% cheated because they kind of had to look themselves in the eyes and they realized that their attitudes and actions weren't matching. So that was called the looking glass effect. When we have self-awareness about our cognitive dissonance, we change pretty fast. So Leon Festinger had two famous studies we'll talk about briefly here. He did the $1, $20 experiment. So basically, students, it was undergraduate college students, They were asked to perform a very dull task. They had these widgets and they were just turning the widget, and it was really dull. And they were asked to lie about it to other students. Said, please go out into the lobby and please tell those students that it was really enjoyable and that you really had a good time and that you think it was a great task. So they were either paid $1 or they were paid $20 to lie about the task. So those that were paid $1 found the task actually more enjoyable. They had to lie to themselves. They had to actually believe the lie, right? They had so much dissonance between knowing that the task was boring and knowing they only took $1 to lie. They had no external justification for why they were lying. So they had much more cognitive dissonance. So they had to believe the lie and change their attitude that it actually wasn't that bad. But those that were paid $20, they had an external justification. I'm getting paid $20 to lie. They didn't really have as much cognitive dissonance or any cognitive dissonance. And another study where he did this, he went inside as a covert natural observation. He went inside a UFO cult in Chicago called the Seekers, and they believed the apocalypse was coming. And he stayed with them for the night when the apocalypse did not come. And he wanted to see how they dealt with the cognitive dissonance. These people had given away all their worldly belongings to join this cult. They had left their families, they had left their jobs. They were true believers. But what happens if their beliefs did not actually happen? And spoiler alert, the world did not end in 1956. So they were either going to have to admit that they were wrong and leave the cult, or they were going to have to change their beliefs to match their actions of staying with the cult after the world didn't end. And most of them stayed. The world didn't end and they changed their beliefs. They said, wow, it must have been us. We gathered here. We were sending positive thoughts. It was because of us. We saved the planet. We stopped the apocalypse. So he got to see cognitive dissonance happening in a group. And we do see our cognitive dissonance is greater when our initiation to get into a group is very, very difficult. So the harder it is to get into a group, the more we will fight to stay there, even when it goes against our morals or our attitudes. So when you fight to get into a gang, you are not going to want to leave that gang. It's going to take a lot, a lot to get somebody to leave a gang, to leave a cult. I mean, you have to be deprogrammed because you really um, you've changed your attitude to match your actions, and you were willing to do quite a lot to get into a fraternity or a sorority where you're going to be hazed for weeks. You're willing to do a lot to get in, so it's going to be very, very hard to get you out because your cognitive dissonance was so great that now you have moved your attitude to follow your actions. And now you are ready for class.